Hey gang, so we're down to the last two loops, or at least the last two loops for now. Actually, maybe three? I mean, if you all throw some more loops down in the comments that you'd like to hear more about, or you'd like to hear me speculate on, I will probably speculate on them. Again, let's take a look at the thumbnail and, okay, this one is the mining loop. Well, this one's one of the more fleshed out of the game loops, so let's take a look at a few of the pieces that still need to drop into place for the mining loop. Ready? Let's get this. So I forgot the caveat on the last one, so I'll make up for that here. For this series, for all my vids really, keep in mind that I am just a dude on the internet. This is just my views on what might happen, how CIG might polish off this loop. It's not necessarily how they will do it or how they should do it, just a best guess based on what I've seen so far, what they've said so far, and what I've gleaned over the last decade or so of following this crazy-ass ambitious project. With that out of the way, let's get into loop itself and what we have now. So with a lot of these industrial loops, it starts here. An info runner or explorer or even the miner themselves probably the miner themselves, pop out to some location and poke around. While they're busy poking, they find some minables. I talked about this a lot in the exploration loop speculation and in the other loops so far, so I don't really want to go into a whole bunch of detail on that here. But basically, someone goes out and finds a mineable. Maybe takes a look at the type, amount, and rarity, and then decides that they want to sell or use that information. So far, so good. And then the mining loop starts in earnest. The miner or miners show up, break the rocks, hoover up the juicy bits, and then either go off to a refinery to refine it, or just goes and sells the raw stuff directly. Or just sell it directly if it's a hand mineable, I suppose. So that's the loop as it stands in the game right now. Find the thing, mine the thing, and maybe if you're feeling particularly saucy, you refine it for extra space bucks. So let's go into what I think will change with this loop, both in its scale and the general design. Again, of all the loops we have, this is probably the most fleshed out one, weirdly enough. I'd argue it's even more fleshed out than the flight model at this point in the development. So, take that for what it is. Here we go. I don't think this will be changing anytime soon. Just being a massively multiplayer game with many different interdependent loops, you want to feed in enough stuff for people to do. Exploration is a huge selling point of this game and games like it. So while I'm kind of joking with the whole find the thing title, the actual loop of going out and finding stuff for the other loops to exploit will, I think, be a massive part of this game. And the entertainment of that loop will probably be the thing that a lot of this game succeeds or fails on. But either way, someone goes out and finds mineable assets, either on the surface of a moon or planet or out in space. At this point, if the person or people who find the thing are not the miner themselves, they'll probably have a few options. Again, went over this in the exploration vid, so check that out for a more detailed dive. But I think we'll eventually be able to make mining claims when we find something like this. Working like the current beacon system, this mining claim would have information about what the claim contains. So the type of rock or rocks, the size, what they contain, and in what percentage, that sort of thing. And while it would have the general location, like say Yela, Stanton system, it wouldn't have the specific location information until someone actually bought that claim. So somebody could say, oh, that's right there, or people could say, that's 3 systems over and it's like 1 rock's worth of laranite. No, that isn't worth it. So think of the remove illegal occupants mission and how they work. You know that it's a Caterpillar wreck on, let's say, Clio, but you don't get the actual location until you take the mission. I could see mining claims working the same way. You buy the claim, you get the specific location, you now own the claim. So at this point I want to say that I could also see the beacon being dependent on what kind of scanners you have. So if you have really good scanners on your exploration ship, you could actually make out more details of that rock than somebody that was running, say, a C-grade component in their scanners. And that way it kind of encourages you, if you're in the exploration loop, to upgrade to the better scanners to get better information to make more accurate claims that people will pay more money for. So infrarunners could also jump in at this point. If a mining claim is undervalued, an infrarunner could grab it and run it to somebody who would pay more, raking in a little bit more profit from that claim. Likewise, the infrarunner could just sit on the claim until that ore becomes more valuable, basically betting on the future. But like I said in the discussion on that loop, the longer an infrarunner sits on information like that, the greater the chance someone else finds that thing and exploits it first. The real question is, how will this mining claim system work? I'm guessing, like the land claim system, how robust the law is around that claim will largely depend on the system and area you're in and its capability to defend the law. We know that mining claims will be in. We already have the claim jumpers missions after all. But what happens when we, the players, are the ones making those claims? Well, if someone claim jumps them and there's some monitor in place to detect that, it'll probably create a beacon and a mission to come defend that claim. Maybe you'll have to preload it with funds, or you'll get some notice that your claim is being jumped, and then you have the option to create a beacon then. No idea, but I'm guessing it'll be something like that. So anyways, now the miner has the mining claim or has found some mineable rock or asteroid on their own. Currently, we basically have, let's call it 4 sizes of rocks. I'm going to blast through this section because most people watching this vid are familiar with this loop as it currently stands, but for consistency's sake, here goes. Hand minables are pretty tiny and can be broken by the mining attachment for the multi-tool. Presumably, since we already know that there's a salvage and a tractor version, we'll probably be getting the industrial-sized mining tool at some point that can do the same thing. The next size up are the same rocks that we have for hand mining, but they're a hair too big to crack with a hand mineable. But a rock can pop them, and probably, presumably, so can that industrial beam. For right now, most people call these rocks or rock minables, but I'm sure we'll eventually be getting more vehicles from other manufacturers that are able to exploit these minables. Next up is the prospector rocks, and these are the ones that contain all the ore and materials that will eventually be the base building blocks for every construction and crafting thing in the game. Well, all the crafting that doesn't require living matter, like flora and fauna, I suppose. Minerals. Ore and minerals. Let's go with that. Sometimes it's easy to forget the scale of these rocks, and the prospector-sized ones are about the size of a house. That's real easy to forget until you have to get out and look at one. And yeah, don't worry, I'll be getting into the gadgets here too. Finally, what we have in the game at the next step up is what I like to call mole rocks, because obviously the only thing that can mine these even larger rocks is the mole. Again, there will definitely be other ships from other manufacturers that will eventually nudge their way into this loop at this scale. But for right now, we have one for each size. The really cool thing that CIG has managed to do to this point in this loop is that every level in this loop has its niche. And this is why many think of this loop as the closest to a final version of a loop as we have in the game. For example, a rock can break a hand mineable, but the chances of overheating it are extremely high. When it blows up, it's going to spread those gems everywhere. More than that, there's also the scale of the economy. While that little hand mineable might be worth it for a person on foot, say just poking around in a cave, maybe as a side gig while they search for a body or collect roly-polies or whatever, those couple small rocks wouldn't be worth it for someone in a rock who's got some specialization. They want the bigger rocks, the rocks, and the larger volume of the gems that they will produce. A person with the multi-tool miner can't crack one of the larger rocks for the rock, although someone with the industrial tool might be able to, like I said earlier. Actually, check that. They'll almost certainly be able to do that, or what would be the point of that thing? But anyways, this scales up on the ladder. A prospector can break rocks, but the way it overheats and explodes those gems, it just spreads them all over the place. Although, okay, so quick side note. I did do a thing once where I went out with a friend with a rock while I had my prospector. I could blow up a whole mess of those rocks in a few seconds, and then he just needed to drive around in his rock and hoover them up. It worked pretty well, but there was kind of a question of whether the time saving was worth the greater spread of the gems and the greater time it took to collect them all. But still, it was an option. So where was I? Right, rocks. So a prospector can't break a mole rock because it's too large. And yeah, hang on, I'm going to get to the gadgets in just a second here. And a mole would find breaking a prospector rock extremely tedious, as it's really easy to overpower the smaller rock. Added to that, the bigger rocks, again, yield more material. So it's hard to see why a mole would want to slum around with prospector rocks unless the pickings were very slim in that area. And yeah, sometimes that can happen. So you have this scale, and each rung on that ladder has its specific place and its specific niche. Gadgets can kind of bend that niche a little bit, making the rock slightly more or less stable or easier to mine, giving a prospector a chance to just maybe pop a bigger rock, and for a dedicated mole operator to possibly fracture a smaller prospector rock with something really valuable and worthwhile in it. But these are small changes, just little tweaks that you can do to a rock with a gadget. Add on to that the various mining heads have their own quirks, and these can be expanded or chilled out with mining modules. And, as will likely be seen in components, maybe even this year, the number of module slots of mining heads are largely dictated by the cost and the quality. So, cheap mining heads, for example, don't have a module slot at all, while the expensive ones can have up to 3, again at this point in the game. Really, there's not a lot of speculation here because this loop is already pretty well fleshed out. From what exists, we can just add the next 2 levels into the mix. We can call these the Arastra rocks and the Orion rocks. Arastra rocks are going to be even larger than mole rocks, and Orion rocks are going to be bigger still. I think that much is pretty obvious. Also, we can guess that the larger mining heads will probably come with more options. Someone mentioned in chat, and I believe this was on either InfoRunners or Salty Mike, that it would be cool if there was an option to dial in the things like the adjustments on the mining heads on the fly with these larger ships. And yeah, that would definitely make a lot of sense. As opposed to having to hop out, take off, or slap on a different module, you'll be able to tweak the nature of the laser to do one thing or another. Of course, you could still have modules and gadgets, but it would make sense that the larger ships would put a larger emphasis on being able to stay inside. You can see this with a ship like the Reclaimer, for example, that will likely give the more manual EVA jobs over to drones remote controlled from the safety of the big ship. Size comes with some advantages after all, and safety should be one of them. So yeah, while they haven't said anything about it, that would be a cool way to go. Just a perk of stepping one more rung up that ladder. Again, as you climb that ladder, the loop also adds a little more complexity each time. At the rock level, you have to control a vehicle while mining. At the prospector level, you have to learn the nuances of mining heads, gadgets, and modules. At the mole level, you have to learn how to coordinate multiple lasers to get a desired result. It would make sense there would be more tricks with the bigger mining lasers, but it would also make sense that the rocks themselves might get a bit more tricky at that scale. For the rocks themselves, it's hard to say what kind of quirks they might have. For a hot minute, they were populating the space rocks with smaller hand minables, but I haven't seen one of those in a couple of years. But that might be an idea, smaller mineable rocks on the bigger ones. So just scale the idea up. Maybe encrusted rocks that have to be carefully cracked open before they can be fractured. Or who knows? What do you think? So tricky rocks, or do you think they'll just kaboom that much harder? So what new gameplay will truly huge mining ships bring? Well, in an abstract way, we have refining in the game right now, but it's kind of a nebulous process that happens behind a curtain. In other words, you pop into a refinery station, drop in your ore, select one of the many varied processes, and then check in once the order is done. I don't think it's a stretch to say that what will eventually go on behind that curtain will be relatively complicated and probably a worthy game loop on its own. Who knows, maybe in a year or two I'll be making a vid on it exclusively, but for right now, we know the refinery process works like this. You have options for different processes by different names, and they mostly revolve around three stats: speed, yield, and time. The better the stats, the more expensive the processes will be. And then you're in a race of diminishing returns. Then again, mining might just be a means to an end for a person doing the mining. So going for a smaller payout and a smaller amount of time might make sense. But there's also something for a miner maximizing their time and effort and profit by going with a high yield, low cost, high time Dynex solution. Spend the least amount of money, maximize the yield, and just go out and mine some more while you wait. But in the future, we'll be able to do this refining ourselves, and all those weird names of various processes will start to really matter. At a guess, and here's where I'll get into the mostly speculative part, each of those processes and solutions will require different sets of chemicals to work. They'll probably require different temperatures and pressures, different ways of distilling the raw product. And boy howdy, if you thought mining was tedious, I'm sure CIG will make it fun. But imagine chemistry matched up with the tiny windows of the mining loop. Now you'll probably have to add the right chemicals or solutions at the right time while keeping the pressure and the heat constant. And yeah, this could be a very nerve-wracking loop. Or, much like the situation with the refining station above, maybe a refiner just goes with that Dynex solution each time. And while it takes a while, it's relatively easy, hence why it's one of the least expensive options. A lot of play on the pressure, maybe additional chemicals needed that aren't very expensive. It just takes a long while to make it work. I could see refiners and even whole orgs doing those calculations in their head. And really, that cost-benefit analysis is exactly what you want as a metagame. And that's where I'm thinking where this one lands. Each rung on the ladder has its niche. A step up injects just a hair more complexity. Seems to me that's the way it should be. Either way, the mining loop and the way they've thought it out give me a lot of hope that CIG can deliver on interesting game loops that don't really get old the more you do them. I'm still mining to this day, for example, not really as my main loop, granted, but I do enjoy it. And that's all I have for this one, gang. What do you think? Let me know down below. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and see me next time.